Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody has been enjoying this conference so far. It's been really tremendous for me to take part and listen in. But today is the day that I get to deliver my message to the masses, so to speak. But just by way of introduction, my name is Sybil Mulokwa, and I live in the state of Texas in the United States in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've been here for several years, really enjoy it, except when it's 100 degrees for more than, a month at a time, which that's not fun for me at all. I'm originally from Illinois, smaller state north of here, but I've been living here in the Texas area for over 20 years, so I've been here for a while. And during my tenure here, while I've lived here, I've actually worked in a couple of different design capacities as leaders, as a leader, as an individual contributor, etc. And so today, what I want to talk about is some of the transformation tales that I have gone through, in recent history as I worked my way through. Most recently in fintech design, my last several roles have been in financial services companies. That wasn't on purpose. I'm not good at math and I'm not good at numbers. So how I ended up here was somewhat of a circuitous route, but it's been serendipitous to say the least. So today I'm going to talk to you about intentional transformation and what that means to me and a couple of different tactics that I employ to be able to do transformation as a design leader at several different roles. So once upon a time, I know you can't show hands and I can't see who all's here, but how many of you all, and you can drop this in the chat, how many of you all have ever come to an organization or a company where during the interview process, they said, hey, we're in the process of transforming to a design-led organization, or, you've been hired to lead the transformation, or, you've been working there for a while and you start to hear these words kind of float around that we are transforming into a design-led organization. And it doesn't have to be those exact words, but something along those lines. I mean, that to me sounds awesome. Like that's what I wanted to do ever since, I left graduate school. I knew I wanted to do design, and I knew that I wanted to make a difference in the organization. And so, more than once, this has come up to me and to my design team, or, myself as I'm either interviewing or as I've been in a role for a certain amount of time. And, as an internal optimist, I tend to be very optimistic. I tend to put on my can-do hat and I get about figuring out how we can do it. So much so that I've been told that I'm a fixer. And that when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I actually am. Because when you bring me a problem, I'm initially going to try and start to fix it. And so the problem of being design led is something that a lot of organizations are facing right now. And so when you hear these words, it's definitely something that can be really, really enticing. And it sounds exciting and it sounds amazing. But what it feels like, so if you see this little toddler and you see them looking down at this first step and they're thinking, I've got to get to the top of these stairs. How am I going to make this happen? I found myself in this position many, many times, whether it was transforming a product, a singular product line within an organization, or, most of us have been in that role or been in that position. Or if it's that, they want, somebody executive, at an executive level decides that they want to transform the organization. This is what it feels like oftentimes. I stand at the bottom of the steps. I just look at the first step and I try to take that step. And so this is going to be a little bit more in detail about that. I'm always excited about the challenge for sure, because as an optimist, it's just like, great, here's another, challenge to conquer. Here's another win that we can get for the team, for the company, et cetera. But it is, it's hard work, and you've got to be very intentional about the way you go through it. And so if this ever happens to you, if you're ever presented with this sort of situation or this sort of proposition, I very highly encourage you to give it some thought. And I say that because it's not for the faint of heart. I've had more failures than successes, if I'm being honest. And I'm being very candid with you all. But give it some thought. Here's some questions that I wish I would have asked before taking on and embarking on these different roles. And to kind of let you know a little bit of my background, I've worked on a lot of innovation projects within the fintech and financial services spaces. And I've also led teams in fintech and financial services. And so, giving it some thought is something that, it took me about 3 or 4 times bumping my head up against the wall before I figured out I should probably ask more questions before I jump in with both feet and eyes shut. And so, here's just a couple of questions and tough conversations. And I encourage anybody that finds themselves in this role to take the bull by the horns and you start the conversation. Because a lot of times people aren't going to just willingly offer up this information. A lot of times when design is coming in, they're the last ones to the table. A lot of times things have been tried with other teams. And so there's a lot of learning that can be done if you just put your researcher hat on and ask some questions. So, what are some of the existing issues? And I like to ask people the existing issues from their perspective, because what they'll do sometimes is they'll step into their quote unquote design leadership role, and they'll say, oh, the designers aren't working hard enough, or the designers aren't doing this, and oh, we don't have research. And I'm like, no, but from your perspective, what are the things that are keeping you up at night? What are, some areas that you wish that the organization could improve? Because I want to take their focus off of design. I also ask, why now? Like, why are you doing this now? I'm super curious as to, as to why you're doing this now versus why you're waiting for it later. Sometimes the answer is simply, we have some extra budget we need to burn through. Okay, that's an answer. It's helpful. Sometimes, it's the product has had, several consecutive quarters of lower numbers than what they would like to see, and that's why they're bringing you in. So you'll get various different answers, or it could be, hey, this is an innovation space, a green space, and we're really trying to lean in and be customer focused as a model for the rest of the company. I've been told that before, and that is like, oh crap. So not only am I and my team going to be focused on leading design and doing it in a customer centric way, but we're actually going to be the model for the rest of the company. I mean, no pressure, right? And then I like to understand too, like what's failed in the past, because a lot of times, when you work with different disciplines, oh, we've already tried that. Oh, we don't want to try that again. Like, oh, that never works. And I just want to understand, like, before I even make one proposal, what's failed in the past. I also like to understand who my stakeholders and partners are. Who am I going to be working with? Who am I working closely with? Will I be, reporting up to the marketing team, or reporting up to the product team, or reporting up to, any other various team that might not be design? Am I reporting directly to the president of the company? I've been in those positions as well. And that is, that's a tremendously powerful role to be in. What resources are in place, and how will I get what I need? So I don't know how many of you all have ever had to fight for budget and fight for tools, or we'll say debate or convince people that you need tools. But sometimes, depending on what tools you're going to be purchasing and leveraging, for example, if you want to do unmoderated testing, that can get very expensive very quickly. I'm not going to name any names, but there's a couple of different unmoderated testing tools that are out there that cost several tens of thousands of dollars. And depending on the size of the organization and the seats that you have, you're going to need a lot of money. And then, is the organization ready for transformation? This I really like to understand, because I want to know, is the organization in a place where they understand what design is, what design can bring to the table, et cetera. And so that kind of takes the onus off the stakeholder, and it helps them understand, like, organizationally, where do we see needs and where do we see gaps? All right, so it's story time. We're going to hop right in. Not sure if everybody knows who Elmo is, but I love Elmo. He is one of my favorite Sesame Street characters. So I'm going to tell you a long story here. It's going to spread out and span a little bit of time. It's not going to be in chronological order, and I will be using fake names and organizations to protect the innocent. But essentially, what I did was, when I got into the organization, I went on a listening tour. And so the most most help that I could get for myself, and the best way to signal that I was ready to partner with others in the organization, was to go on an information gathering tour. I have done the whole thing where I come in like a bull in a china shop, and I say, we need to do this and we need to do that. And so through time, through wisdom, I hope, I've learned that the best thing to do when you come into a new situation and organization is to listen. And so I spent, about a month and a half or so, about 6 weeks, listening to different folks in the organization, gathering information from product, from tech, from design, from marketing, legal, etc., business intelligence, all sorts of different pockets within the organization. If it's an organization that exists, or a team that exists within our organization, I was talking to somebody, customer success, customer care, having conversations with them. And I put on my researcher hat for real. And I really just was asking open-ended questions. And I was trying to figure out, what was working well and what wasn't working well, essentially within the organization. And so really trying to wrap my arms around what was going on. And so just a couple of facts of this story. It's a typical software company, this company that I'm going to share about. Typical meaning, there was product, tech, design. They were all doing software. There was, old product stacks and different things of that nature. There was a triad, and that's how they got products delivered. There was a major focus on quantitative analysis and metrics. So meaning, customer satisfaction scores, NPS scores, transactional NPS scores, et cetera. Funnel metrics and analytics to understand how products were doing and how they were performing. Tons of A/B tests. And that's how they would determine success. Very little focus on qualitative analysis and qualitative metrics and talking to users. And so, that was a key point for me. But it was really trying to understand this company, where they were, where their psyche was. And it's kind of like raking the leaves. There's all this information there, not to mention all the external information. So secondary research. So I needed to understand, what did this financial market look like? What was going on, with taxes and stimulus and all these different things. I needed to understand the financial state of the United States in this case. But I needed to take an external view on what was going on in the market and what was going on in the news, because all these things had an effect on the work that we were doing. And so, it was, for me, it was more or less just really trying to gather all the information that was there and start to make sense of it, because that, oddly, it hadn't been done. One of the things I've learned through time and through the years is that a lot of organizations, there's no shortage of data. There's tons of data, but no one's interpreting it, and no one's putting their arms around it, so to speak, to getting an understanding of what needs to be done. Also had a bunch of conversations with people. So stakeholders, subordinates, peers, really wanted to understand what was going on. And so I spent a lot of really good time talking to every part of the organization, as I mentioned earlier. So I spent time, understanding from a legal perspective, like, what is going on? What are some of the constraints? What are some of the concerns? Talking to the customer care team, which, if you have a customer success or a customer service team within your organization, I highly recommend that you go and have a conversation with a couple of those folks. They're very quickly able to give you a summation of what the top level issues are and what the top call drivers are within the organization, which is good as gold. You can get a ton of really great insights from them and understanding their world and what they do. And they also have really great recommendations for the product and how to improve the product. So spent a good amount of time with them. And just really understanding all the different stakeholders, what their desires were, what their goals were. Some people, I wanted to understand, like, are you trying to get promoted right now? How can we work together? How can I make you look good? Different things of that nature. And the idea here is that you're building influence. So you're building partnerships, you're networking, you're making your way through the organization in such a way that's going to help you be able to later on down the road, garner favors. And I know that probably doesn't sound like, oh gosh, like that sounds like politics, and it absolutely is. Pretending that politics don't exist, I think, is a detriment to anybody that feels like, oh, I don't want to play politics. I just want to do good work. I totally get that, and I fully support it. But at the same time, too, if you don't have influence within the organization, it's really difficult to get anything done. Then moving on to the product. For those of you all that have visited or are in the United States, this is the Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is old. It is, it took, I think, I was reading it, reading up on it, and it took about, I think, 6 million years to carve out the Grand Canyon. And if you've ever gone to see it, it is stunning how large it is and how big it is. And what I love about this photo is that if you look at the mountains in the back, you can see these different layers, these striations. And for those of y'all that are, geologists or no geologists, like, you could see all these different layers. These layers tell a story. Our product was the same way. In the world of the internet and technical products, I mean, it was over 20 years old. So this is an old product, like old tech stack, dusty, dry. There was a lot of mismatched experiences that were happening within the product. And so it was very, very inconsistent. I mean, I'm talking, you look at the buttons, in the beginning of the experience versus halfway through the experience, and the button padding would be completely different. So it was little things like that that just chipped away and eroded people's confidence in our product. And so we needed to find a way to be able to surface that to the business so they would find a way to make investments in those areas. And additional to that, there was no design system. There was a pattern library that one of the designers had worked on kind of like as a side project. So, they weren't really investing in the product and making the product better. It was more or less just kind of patching the holes and making sure that people were able to get through the experience. So good enough was good enough. And so that wasn't necessarily my take, but that's kind of where it was as I was learning about the organization. Speaking of the organization, I really wanted to understand, were we all rowing together? Was everybody going in the same direction? And in this case, they were not. Surprise, surprise. But the organization, how was design perceived? That was a really, really, really eye-opening question. And sadly, design was perceived as a bottleneck. Research was a nice to have. All these different things that you've heard about that don't really serve an organization well if they want to be customer centric. All these things were going on. I also asked the question, like, why is design here? Like, if they're a bottleneck, like, why do you still have designers? You can just hire some graphic designers and get rid of the UX team. And the answers were really interesting. There wasn't a really good answer. They didn't see a difference between graphic design and UX design, which is a huge red flag. Do we need to run our own Jira board, or do we need to focus on just having design, be a part of the Scrum team? Like, how do you set the teams up? So really just trying to understand the organization from the outside looking in and from the inside looking out, because I needed to understand where we were as far as the organization goes. And then finally, this wasn't by any stretch the last thing that we looked at, but really understanding the data and the analytics. The design team, taking an internal look, they were aware of Tableau. So we did have network access to Tableau, which is a data tool that you can use to interpret data and make sense of data. We also had access to Google Analytics to understand how our product was working. But the key here is that the design organization didn't own any of the metrics or the numbers and the analytics, which was a huge problem. So McKinsey Design, I've got a quote from them later on in this presentation, but analytical leadership is definitely something that top design teams have a really great handle on within organizations where they're really successful. So does any of this sound familiar? This to me, it was just like, wow. After sitting through, several weeks of understanding and raking the information, understanding the people, understanding the product, understanding the processes and the organization and the data and where we were, that was a mountain of information. And it's not to say that, I was ecstatic to find all these issues, but I was kind of excited because I love a good challenge. And so having these things in front of me and trying to work with the people, the product, the process, and the organization and the data this is where transformation happens. And there's so many different ways, a million different ways to solve these issues. And so what I'm going to share going forward are just a couple of the ways, a couple of the anecdotes that I use to solve for this organization. So I'm going to hop right in. Love Dwight. He is one of my favorite characters on The Office, if you ever watch it, the American version. But yeah, this is, it was just one of those moments where I was just like, oh my gosh, there's so much information to make sense of. So I started out with the triad, and the reason I started with the people was because when I got to this organization, there was a lot of interpersonal issues. The team the design team specifically was fighting amongst themselves. There was 2 cliques essentially. One clique was just a couple of guys that were saw themselves as the experts and saw themselves as like the leaders of the team, and the other clique was everybody else. And so, I really had to gel the team and get them to work as a cohesive unit. And so, we did some offsites. And so what that looks like is we organized, basically a session for the design team to come together and to focus on design centric issues. So one of the things we did was we mapped out the product from from the beginning to the end. So all the way from the marketing pages to the login, working your way through the product. And then we ended up, on the outside of the product. And so, or completing the task at hand. And so what that did was it started to highlight a couple of areas where, number one, design was not consulted. Decisions were made and design was not consulted. Because remember, this product was 6 million years old by the time I got to it. And so, we surfaced some areas where, content wasn't consulted, research was not done, and design was definitely not a part of the resulting production values that we were seeing. So we did the end to end. We also did a couple of different offsites where we just came together and just had fun. I had to get these people to work together and to actually like each other. Was it fully successful? I would say it's probably 80% successful. There was a couple of folks that realized like, hey, they didn't want to be a part of the team. They didn't want to be, there at the company at the time. And so they decided to work on other things in different organizations. And that is fair. And I understood that. And so, I told them, if you need a reference, more than happy to help you find what makes you happy, and more than happy to be an ally to get you what you need as far as, your future endeavors. And so again, my job, my charter, when I came in, chief product officer told me, you need to gel this team and you need to make them work as a cohesive unit. So that was job number one. So I set about doing that on day one. The other thing I had to do was there were some people that were on the team that weren't necessarily serving the team. And so we had to have some hard conversations. Before I got there, the design team was reporting to the product team. And so there was a lot of, if you have somebody leading design that is not a design leader, there's a lot of bad behaviors that are allowed to go on that don't necessarily serve the organization or serve the design that we're trying to do to win market share. And so, there were some people that we had to let go, unfortunately, and that sucked, but it wasn't anything personal. It was just literally based on performance. And so we had to write some pips and to, help people find opportunities in other organizations. Again, not fun, but it was something that had to be done. And then, I had a major epiphany in that I needed a strong people manager. That was something that, as I was struggling to get contracts in place, sunsetting some contracts, like there was a bunch of administrative work that I needed to do that didn't allow me the time to be able to really focus on the team as far as, from a personal perspective. So I hired a new people manager, and that was his sole role, was to focus on the people. So, the design team, as you can see as well, it's not our ratios were off. This is not an accurate representation of the exact numbers, but we had the smallest team within the triad. I mean, technology was running full steam ahead with a ton of developers and QA folks, and then product team was fairly large, and the design team was really, really small. And so, we needed to figure out what those ratios were. And so that included a conversation with the president, understanding like, hey, what are our ideal ratios for where we're at as an organization and what we're trying to do. And so, taking the team again, the design team, and looking internal to what we were doing, we had to redo our team charter. And so this slide that you're looking at here, this is one slide of more of a larger slide. And so essentially, I got this idea. There's a podcast I like to listen to. I believe it's called Finding Our Way. It's with Peter Merholz and Jesse James Garrett. And they have some tremendous leaders that come on and talk about design and design leadership. And one of the conversations that they had was between Peter and Jesse, and they were talking about doing a design team charter. Happy to share that link afterwards, but we essentially took what they did, and we did that. We put it together. We put together our purpose. What is our purpose? So we had a purpose statement. We had a workshop to really understand, like, why are we here as a design team? What are we looking to achieve, and what are the goals that we're trying to address? We also looked at our mission, like how are we going to accomplish the purpose that we have set forth? Our values, this is our value slide, and I love it because it's so near and dear to my heart. And this is absolutely aligns with me as a person, as a designer, and as a design leader. We win together, we pursue excellence, we're empowered, we have the courage to fail, practice empathy for our users, and be open-minded. Those were all key critical values that the team came up with, the design team, as we worked through. It took us several months to get here. This was not a one-day deal. This was not a couple of hours. This was several hours over a couple of months. And then we also had our norms outlined. And the idea here is that we wanted to get the design team aligned and gelled together as a team. And what better way to do that than to have the design team come together and state their purpose, mission, values, and norms. Another exercise we did was we worked on getting our vision, our strategic focus, priorities, tactics, and measures aligned. And the idea here is not to read the slide. Please don't read the slide. You will go cross-eyed trying to read this slide. There's a lot of information here. But essentially what it is, this is an alignment triangle. And so what I did here was I worked with the team to understand, we took our vision and we put our vision at the top. And the vision, how we were going to support that vision was our strategic focus. So strategy wise, this is more tactical. This is more where the rubber meets the road. What were we going to focus on as a team? And we were going to improve the experience, experiment for disruption. So this is our innovation arm, and support our core experiences. So that's the run the business work. And then from there, we were able to build out, like, what are our priorities for experimenting for disruption? And so what happens is these items, these lines, they all line up to the top line vision. And so for experiment for disruption, we're going to focus on solving customer problems through innovation, leveraging the network. And some of the tactics we would employ, defining the problems and the opportunity spaces, because that hadn't been done. The team essentially was being told what to do as opposed to using research and discovery to go figure out what the problems were and what we needed to solve. We wanted to experiment with the ecosystem flows, et cetera. And then we have some of the measures below. So high impact moments that matter, that, being defined and adopted. So again, there was a lot of definition work that needed to be done before we could go experiment for disruption, but it all laddered up to our vision, our ultimate vision. And so, I worked on this thing, and it's called an alignment triangle. You can find you can find many, many versions out on the internet. Different companies, they use these to basically align teams and to gel the team. So the idea here was gel a team, get them all pointed in the same direction, and so we can all start marching in that same direction. So this alignment triangle was put in place a couple of years ago. And then, the team, like, we just started to kind of tick off some of these metrics. So, percent of coverage within each product, how many interviews were we doing with, the front end dev teams, like how many, like all these different measures measured up to the tactics, and the tactics led up to the priorities, strategic focus and vision. So you could go, up or down depending on what you're trying to accomplish within your organization. This is a really, really powerful tool that helps people see, like, basically they can print this out, put it on their wall, and they can see where the work that they're doing is serving the organization and serving the vision that we've set forth. So I'm going to jump to the product team. So the product team, great bunch of folks, but we needed to get an understanding of how to work better together. And so within the product team, what we needed to do was we did some work. And so this, again, don't try and read this. It's a lot of different work, but essentially what it represents is we did these personality tests to understand, and the tool is called Team Sight, I believe. And so what we did was each one of the dots, each one of the groups of dots equals one person. So in the first column, I could have a 1, and in the second column, I might have a 5. In the third column, I would have a 4, and in the fourth column, I would have like a 2 or a 3. And so each one of these colors represents a different person on the product or the design team. So we combined all the teams, we did this personality test, and the idea here is we needed to understand how each other was working. And so you'll notice there's a couple of outliers. So on the first column for ideas, we had one person that had a 1. That's it, one person. And then on the order and the routine, we had 3 people that had very high 4s. And so what that let us know was, like, man, we really don't have a lot of people that are thinking very concretely about ideas. We have a ton of ideas. What if we, and how could we, and what if we? That's what you're seeing represented on the left-hand side towards the abstract. A lot of abstract thinking going on, very little concrete thinking. And so this helped us understand who we needed to hire next for the team. We needed to get a couple more people that were more concrete thinkers that would ask questions and poke holes in the daydreamers' ideas. Because we had quite a few. That was where the majority of the team fell was in the abstract thinking area. And so this, what it helped us to do was we came together. We had the design team, we had the product team all together in one group. And so what we did was we put the teams together in their working groups, and we had them take their numbers and have a conversation. And so what we found was that, like, people that were abstract thinkers, they were getting really upset with the concrete thinkers because they thought the concrete thinkers were, doomsday, like, the sky is falling, Chicken Little type of people. But what it was the concrete people were really just trying to understand, how are we going to do this? Not just what are we going to do up here in an abstract concept, but how are we going to do this? And so we also, we had a really, really great conversation, great debate amongst the teams. And so much so that after we were leaving that session, one of the product managers found me and said, we probably had the best conversations we've had within our working team, within our Scrum team after this, because now they understood how each other was working. Does this work for everybody? I think it could be helpful. It's not the end all be all. The other thing we did was we did team working agreements. So Atlassian has a tremendous playbook, and they have a team working agreements that teams can go through and work through within their Scrum teams or within whatever team it is that they're working on. So they understand, what are the norms? How are we working together as a team? Very, very powerful. And what we found was that there was just a lot of misconceptions. Nobody had ill intentions. Go figure. Everybody was trying to do good work. Everybody was trying to make the product better or make the team better. It's just sometimes you miss each other in the conversation in the day to day if you don't sit down and actually intentionally talk about how you're going to work, what does good look like, how do we succeed, etc. So really, really powerful work there. And from the tech team, really, really great great team of professionals, lots and lots and lots and lots of talent. But we had some major, major misunderstandings as far as it came to front end development. So remember the Grand Canyon I was talking about? A lot of that Grand Canyon issue was coming about because there was multiple layers of refactors that weren't finished. So it's like we got a refactor that was a third of the way done. And so, the design system wasn't fully implemented. And so that's where you had 3 different styles of buttons within one experience. Super painful, not only for us, but it was death by 1,000 cuts for customers and users as they worked with our product and try to make their way through. And so I had a conversation with one of the leaders of the tech team, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we just hire full stack developers." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, all the developers are full stack." And so, I wish I would have had this little meme to share with him before he ended up leaving. But essentially, what was happening was, we just, the full stack developer. I'm not saying that if you're a full stack developer, you can't be awesome at everything, but chances are you're not awesome at everything. You're probably average at a lot of things and really, really good at 1 or 2 things. And that goes for everybody. It's like a T-shaped designer, T-shaped developer, what have you. But we definitely had a lot of opportunities with the tech team and all the different refactors that we had tried to do, and a lot of the different agile practices that just did not take design into consideration. So we would do incremental planning every 6 to 8 weeks. And design, design at the time was a nice to have. Design was just there in the room as an observer and not necessarily a driver. The other thing was we had switched over from using Sketch and Envision to using Figma. And Figma's got a ton of developer tools. Sketch did as well, but Figma definitely stepped it up. And quite frankly, there was a lot of developers that just kind of weren't interested in spending the extra time to learn a new tool. And so, again, good enough was deemed good enough. And finally, the incentive. So the tech team was incentivized to get things out the door, to complete code, get widgets out the door, and to do automated testing. That's all they were incentivized to do. And so when I looked at what was designed versus what was developed and deployed, there was vast differences. And so, there's just a lot of stuff that was going on that needed to be addressed. And so we did a site audit, which, if you're not familiar with a site audit, it's literally you just go through the experience and you look at it from a user's perspective. And so, during the site audit, we were able to uncover multiple issues. We took a week where we really just focused the design team, and a couple of QA folks, and we did some pair programming with the dev team. And so we went through the site, we found low-hanging fruit that we could address. The issues that we couldn't address immediately, we went ahead and submitted bugs for those in our system. And then, we also were going to work with them on coming up with a definition of done. Definition of done is, if you're talking agile, it's like, when do we know that this thing is done, and when does it get approved to move on to the next gate? And so, we also started to offer some Figma training, and essentially at the beginning it was just like, literally, here's a link to Figma for developers that's going to help the team get where they need to go. And so, we took this time, and we had a lot of work that was done by the team, and essentially we just needed to time box that work so we could get a good body of work before we could ask for a percentage of the development team's time to address these issues. Excuse me. We also had a bunch of workshops. And so these workshops weren't just like, hey, how can we fix the product? It was like, hey, we're going to do a design thinking workshop. So we hired an external third party to come in and do some training with the team. And this was, again, one of those aha moments where we had a cross-functional team. We had development, we had product, we had design, and all the different teams were represented there. And again, after this workshop, we had a lot of really great feedback, and people were really excited. They were like, wow, this was really awesome. We got to focus in an area where we're not just kind of bogged down, but we could do some greenfield thinking, blue sky thinking, and really just, stretch our imaginations and build things, that we might not necessarily deploy, but it was fun for them to be able to sit down and be able to workshop. And then eventually what we did was we started to take all the different tools that we learned in the workshop, design thinking tools. We were able to incorporate that in the day-to-day work that each of the Scrum teams were doing, which was tremendously helpful. The other thing we did was every time we do research, we invite the whole team. We invite the entire team to attend. They don't always attend, but that's okay. But, the door is open. And then, one of the researchers, what they would do is they would take all of the learnings, the recording, and they would place that in a Teams channel and broadcast it to the entire organization. So anybody in the company was able to go in and review the research, review the learning at a top line level, and be able to actually see customers interacting with our products. We also invited customers into the office, and so that was really tremendous. And so what that looked like was we were doing several different participatory design events. And so we would invite customers in to use our products in front of our product managers, our engineers, our executive team, et cetera. And I can't tell you how uncomfortable it is for them to watch these things happen and see users stumble through the product that was designed or developed or coded how it should be. Oh, they're using it wrong. It's like, no, they're not using it wrong. There's some work that we need to do to implement and make this better. And so through all of this, what happened was we were able to get people to feel the customer. And so without them knowing it, they were starting to be customer led. So I would be in, leadership meetings, and people would often bring up, oh, well, remember that user that did da, 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 da. It's like, yes. And so just serendipitously, we were starting to get design into the organization in such a way where it's kind of like sneaking the vegetables into the brownies, like you don't know it's there, but it's good for you. And that's what we were doing with the organization. So we did tons of this. And, we were really able to get people to understand customers' pain by having them use the products, having the customers use the product in front of our team members. So it was really, really fascinating. And the metrics. So we needed to own some of the data. Admittedly, this is not one of my strong suits, but I'm getting better as I get older. But we really had to own the data. And so, this is a McKinsey from the business value of design. They have a really, really great report, several great reports out there. And so essentially it's, they're saying they have not always embraced design metrics or actively shown management how their designs tie to meeting business goals. And so that is the designers. And so when we think about, the design team and design organizations, usually they're the most recent to the table. So they're the last ones to come into the room and have a seat at the table. And so what I've found and what I've seen in a lot of cases is that, design metrics are not actively embraced by designers. Designers are more or less getting about the work of getting the things done and not necessarily taking the time to measure and get the right metrics in place. So measuring delight was something that a concept that I shared with the research team. I'm like, how do we do this? How do we know if our product is delightful? And so how do we go about measuring that? And so there's tons of different metrics that you can use out there. I mean, there's like, Google's heart metrics. There's customer satisfaction, all these different scores that you can use to measure delight. And so, I presented this idea, and it was one of those "how might we" moments. How might we see how delightful our product is, or how might we measure delight within our product to see if it's actually not just serving the needs, but if it's if it's easy to use, and if it's making people feel like they had a great time within our product. And so the delight score was basically made up of three different components. Were my needs met? So that's a question we asked. And is the product easy to use? And was the product delightful? And so we left that delightful open to interpretation, because some people might think of delightful. I go back to the sprinkles. You might hate sprinkles. Sprinkles might not be delightful to you. And so, thinking about, was the product delightful, we were able to basically work with the marketing team and append a couple of questions to the marketing surveys that they were sending out. And so we were able to triangulate essentially on this delight score to see what the delight would be. So these are the three questions that were asked. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. This is one of those moments where we're going from a 0 to 1. And so there was nothing before. And so we didn't own any of the metrics or any of the data specifically in the design org. And so this was a moment where we were able to take the tools that we had in a very scrappy fashion and put those together to do a measurement of the delight score. So the executive team, when they saw this, when they saw the answers and they saw the numbers, they had a ton of questions. I think a big part of what it was they were starting to finally see a little bit of customer sentiment, which wasn't necessarily coming through on, our NPS scores, et cetera. So we ran this with over 15,000 users, and we found that most of our customers were generally satisfied, not necessarily delighted. So that was a really key insight. So it's like, this product, it does enough to get the job done, but they weren't having, like, people weren't, jumping for joy as they were using this product. And so, once we got that delight score and we were able to benchmark, set a benchmark baseline of where we had numbers, we were able to go back and run that, over and over again and start to see increases in the numbers. And so there was a couple of things that we did within the product. Unfortunately, I don't have screenshots, can't share those just yet, but we put more illustrations within the product to make it feel more lighthearted. We changed our voice and tone to be a little bit more human and not so analytical and not so, financial jargon based. And so we were able to basically make the user experience a lot more friendly, a lot more user friendly. And so this is something that is still ongoing. Numbers are still being collected. And so as the future goes, hopefully this delight score will be built out, and hopefully there'll be more data that we can add to the delight score. So finally, the last thing that I want to chat on is, the key insight in all of this was the common denominator is relationships. I started out this conversation talking about politics and different things of that nature. And politics, politics suck. Like, politics are not fun. I don't enjoy them. But the idea is not to think of it as politics, is to think about it as relationships. And how can you win together as a team? Design transformation, it can't be done by a party of one. So that kid standing at the bottom of the steps, that was me. I can't do it by myself. I needed partnership from my tech folks. I needed partnership from product folks, marketing. Very hard to believe, but legal played a key role in us getting what we needed. But there were so many different times where relationships came into play. And so I'm so thankful that at the beginning of that story, at the beginning of this story, I spent time with people and built the relationships necessary in order to be successful. So in all of that, your influence is equal to your success. That is a key insight. Your influence is equal to your success. And so make the relationships, build the relationships, and keep the relationships. So with that, I will say thank you for your time. And we are right at time. And I didn't see any questions in the chat. So Abby, I'll turn it back over to you. And then we can just kind of go from there. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yes, feel free to drop any last minute questions if you have them. But other than that, we're all good to go back to the reception and then wait for the next session. Awesome. Thanks so much, Sybil.
Thank you. Of course.
Mm-hmm.